I guess I'm going to start just because we have so much territory to cover. And I hope you enjoy this talk. It's going to be quick. But basically, this covers a sailing trip that I took with my family starting in 2005. So, wow, that's 15 years ago. In case you're wondering who those young people are, I look a lot older now, and so do my families. In the photos, you'll see a lot of young people around, and they've all grown up. My kids. So we started in Rhode Island, up here in New England, and we headed south. We bought a boat in the spring of 2005, and of course, I spent the summer refurbing it. It was an old boat, 1978 fin sailor, motor sailor, 38 feet with big tankage, very sturdy, Lloyd specs, rugged boat. But of course, being an old boat, she needed a lot of work. And so we spent the whole summer working on her, headed south in the fall, went from Block Island offshore down to Cape May, New Jersey, then up the Delaware Bay, down Chesapeake, and then we went down the ICW to Florida. And we were down there by Thanksgiving and um, spent quite a bit of time in Florida fixing all those teething problems that you have with any boat, new or old, before we could head down to the Caribbean. This map just gives you a general idea of where we went. We eventually left Florida, went around the west end of Cuba, offshore down to the Swan Island, which is a little tiny speck out here off the coast of Honduras and Nicaragua, and then down to Providencia, which is an island owned by Colombia, and then on down to Panama, and eventually over to Cartagena in Colombia, and then back. So let's get started. There's Minky. She was a big old motor sailor, pilot house. Not exactly a boat I was looking for, but I fell in love with her. She turned out to be a great boat for us. Very comfortable. She's a big little boat. She's only 38 feet, but carries 150 gallons of water and 115 gallons of fuel. We started to head south. Like I said, the first one of the fun things with traveling with a family is you do a lot of celebrating. You try to keep life going with all the different regular things that you do on land, like Halloween. So we were in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, for Halloween, and my kids went trick or treating in the town with other cruising kids. And pretty soon you hook up with a great group of fellow travelers on the Intracoastal Waterway. If you've never done it, the Intracoastal Waterway is an amazing um, waterway along the east coast of the United States. It's 1,090 miles between Norfolk and Miami, most of it inland. There are sections like this in I believe this is the Neuse River, where you can do some great sailing. There's also just gorgeous anchorages. You see a whole side of the country that many people never see. There are many nights we were anchored by ourselves, couldn't see a single light ashore. There's fun towns to visit along the way. This is Beaufort, North Carolina. And by the way, it's Beaufort North and Beaufort South, in case you're wondering, but they're both great places to visit. You anchor here right off the beach, and it's not the greatest photo, but one of the cool things is wild horses roam the beaches right across from town. We kept heading south. There is a lot of motoring in the ICW. There's lots of winding waterways through the marshes, which would be very hard to sail, and opening bridges and shallows and all sorts of things. Our pilot house motor sailor was really perfect for those conditions. You're protected from the weather, warm or cold, and you can see my daughter's over there probably working on her schoolwork, reading, while my wife steers us down the waterway. Again, gorgeous anchorages, wildlife preserves, just very, very peaceful, very comfortable cruising, if you don't mind the motoring. And if you don't like motoring at all, it's really easy to pop outside and have some great runs and then go back inside when the weather turns bad. Eventually you get down to some really interesting cities. This was Charleston, South Carolina. Lots of culture, lots of great places to eat, unbelievable food, fun things to see. And we're homeschooling this whole time. So, we're always talking about the history of places with our kids. And we ended up starting out with a program called the Calvert System, which is very organized. Eventually, we ended up abandoning it because there's just so many cool things to see and do that it really made more sense to, while you're in a place like Charleston, to learn more about it. And down in South Carolina, we had some old friends who had kids now around the same age as our kids. In the background, my son is in the orange shirt with the long hair, and my daughter's in the green jacket there. Daughter Heather and my son Ian, and these are three of their friends that um, we met when my son was born in South Carolina, and we visited them in Beaufort, South Carolina. Again, there's just so many cool things. This is on an island, Cumberland Island, down there just north of Florida and Georgia still, that used to be a wealthy estate and has now been abandoned. And it's a national park, and there's just ruins and just amazing scenery. And you can wander all over it. And as a boater, you're there by yourself half the time. These are just some friends we met along the waterway. Uh, Tricky little anchorage there, but kind of classic. You just anchor between two banks in deep water with a huge current that spins you around one way or the other. St. Augustine, Florida, is the oldest city in North America. It goes back to the 1500s. Great place to visit. Manatees. This is in Titusville, Florida. There's the family looking. That's my wife Leslie in the red coat, and they're watching the manatees swimming around in the marina in Titusville. Finding little lizards on the beach is always a lot of fun for kids. The kids never had a shortage of things to do. They are always figuring out great things to do. This is an anchorage in Peck Lake, and we ended up sitting in there waiting out a lot of bad weather going by. In fact, the weather was so bad, you can sort of see this photo looks kind of fuzzy. It was from the spray flying through the air. The salt spray coming in from the ocean was just thick there, and everything was coated with salt after a while. But the kids, never had a lack of things to do. Like I said, they found things on the beach, they found animals, they asked questions. We were always having a lot of fun. This flying fish was preserved on the beach from the sand, came ashore. Eventually, we crossed the middle of Florida on the Okeechobee Waterway, which for Minky is a little treacherous because there's a railroad bridge in there that only has 49 feet of vertical clearance, and Minky's mast height is about 49 feet. So we approached it at very slow speed and managed to get under with our antenna bending on the metal as we went under the bridge. Here we are tied up at a place called La Belle, Florida, which has free dockage for 3 days. And you have to med moor, which is kind of strange. It's the first med moor I've ever done. We did it off the stern because it was very shallow near shore. If you went in stern first, I think you'd be aground. Lots of free dockage in the Intercoastal Waterway, which people are surprised at. Many, many fun places to tie up for free. And it was a great place. We learned in the Okeechobee, you're totally protected. We found a dock that was very inexpensive, and we rented it for some time to be able to repair things like our roller furling. We learned on the way south was pretty old. We knew that going in, but we decided before we went down to the Caribbean, it was time to replace it. So we began a series of repairs, and we stayed up behind this house in a canal for quite some time. Replaced the roller furling, replaced most of the rigging, put on solar panels. Here I'm up the mast, gradually making my way up to the top, putting in mast steps. And we have mast steps on the main mast, which were invaluable. I would highly recommend them if you're ever going to the Caribbean, simply for one reason. Climbing up there gives you a fantastic view when you're navigating coral waters, and we'll see more about that later. being tied up for a while with plenty of power was great for the kids. They were able to do their schoolwork, work on the computers, and have Wi-Fi and stuff like that. This was in 2005, so internet connectivity was not as universal as now. Like we didn't have a cell phone that could provide Wi-Fi. We had to find it where we could. So we were always searching out internet cafes and people's houses where we could borrow their Wi-Fi for a while. Kids worked on art projects. There was tons of wildlife there in the Okeechobee, just beautiful birds. This guy lived right behind our boat. It was a little nerve wracking. And he was probably about 8 feet long, but he wasn't the biggest alligator we saw in there. There were some bigger ones. My daughter and son had the aft cabin. It was kind of like their little playhouse back there. And it was also a real safe place to be when you're offshore. You kind of put pillows and blankets all around you and wedge yourself in and be padded. It was really cozy. We bought a Iridium satellite phone, and unfortunately, in those days, this was 2005 again. It was kind of state of the art, but the connectivity between the sat phone and the laptops wasn't the best, and I ended up with bags and bags of various connectors and adapters, and finally, I figured out a way so that we could download weather, which was the main thing I was interested in, and also our email periodically. And it proved invaluable for a couple of emergency issues that we had later. But the offshore weather from via the Iridium phone was just fantastic. A lot of people were struggling with SSBs and downloading GRIB files and all kinds of other nonsense. And I was getting the offshore text forecast direct from NOAA every day, which made life easy. We eventually went down to the Keys, and in that box right there is a wind vane for the self-steering that I wouldn't recommend doing it, but I managed to install while the boat was in the water. I drilled the holes in the transom and put a wind vane self-steering gear on the stern of our boat. This was in Marathon, Florida, where there are lots of cruisers hanging out. Nowadays, it's a huge mooring ball field in there, but when we were there, you could still anchor, and it was a great place to meet other cruisers and do the final preparations for heading down to the Caribbean. But soon we were headed offshore, and we were in a rush because hurricane season was coming. This was late May, and we didn't want to be north of the Caribbean during the hurricane season. Basically, if you get down to about 10 degrees latitude, you don't have to worry about hurricanes. So we were trying to hightail it. So we decided to go direct from the Keys around the west end of Cuba and straight to Panama. That was our plan. But it was rough going. Offshore, once we rounded the west end of Cuba, the wind was right on the nose, 20, 25 knots. Constant thunderstorms and squalls, and it was tacking every hour for 6 days, basically. So partway down, we decided to duck into a little tiny island called Swan Island, we didn't even have a chart for it. And but later I learned there weren't any charts anyway that were really any good. The only chart we had was a sketch chart in an old Reed's Nautical Almanac. And basically it turned out to be like most Caribbean islands. You had to eyeball your way in through the coral heads, which luckily we were able to do. And there were 6 Honduran Navy personnel on the island who came out to the boat and immediately got seasick because we were rolling our guts out in an open anchorage, and checked us in. We headed on down to Colombia, and we didn't ever plan on going to Colombia, but again, there was this island in the middle, right ahead of us, called Providencia. And after bashing our brains, beating to windward for 650 miles, we decided to stop at, why not stop at Providencia? So Heather helped us by making a Colombian courtesy flag with her art supplies on board. And we were a little worried, Colombia sounded a little sketchy. So, but boy, it looked great to see a land coming up over the bow after all that time in really hot, humid conditions, by the way, which was kind of the tough part. So you're going into 20, 25 knots of wind. Spray is just flying over the whole boat. You're smashing along as fast as you can. So you have this choice. You can either open the hatches and everything gets soaked and covered with salt, or you keep all the hatches closed and it turns into a sauna down below. So we were a sauna most of the way. And we were wondering, what's it going to be like here? Again, did not have very good charts for this, but there were all these buoys around, so it looked like it was doable. So we did have some guidebooks and things, and between the actual buoys, which are kind of amazing for the Caribbean, because typically in at least in the Southwest Caribbean, when you see a buoy, A, you can't trust that it's on position. B, if it has a light, it's usually not showing the correct uh, pattern. And C, 90% of the time, it's not even there, including lighthouses. They're often missing. So our first greeting into Colombia was pretty friendly. These are the guys. The guy on the right is the agent who checked us in. You have to actually use an agent back then, so we had to pay him. The guy on the left works with the port captain. He's actually in the Colombian Navy, and I can't remember who the guy was in the middle. I think he helped to bring him out on the boat. I think he was the boat guy actually, and this was on somebody else's boat. But we were clearing in. Very friendly group, and we soon learned that the first tropical system, this was like June 3rd, I think, or June 4th, around in there. And the first tropical wave of the season came over us. And we were really happy to be in Providencia when this thing passed by. But it indicated we couldn't linger too long because Providencia is still far enough north to get hammered by hurricanes. In fact, it did this year and is still recovering. Something like 90% of the structures on the island were either destroyed or damaged, and all the communication was knocked out. So a lot of the things you see here are going to be damaged. This map, I just wanted to show you quick. Again, we left South Florida, went around the west end of Cuba. We could see Cuba off in the distance, really tempting, but we didn't stop. Went on down to a little tiny speck out here called Swan Island, then on down to right about in here, actually. I think that island is San Andreas, which is just south of Providencia, and then we're at Providencia. Eventually, we're going to head down here to Bocas del Toro in Panama, and then over to Panama, Colon, Panama, and over to an area we call the Sambla Islands, which is actually the Gunayala. And then we went over to Cartagena, Colombia. We had a great time on Providencia, and we started to hook up with other cruisers who were doing stuff like we were. On the left there is Pete, and his wife Alice is to the right of my wife Leslie. Here's Leslie, and here's Alice, and that's Ruben. And those guys sailed from England, and they ended up going back to New Zealand, where they live now, with their family, and we became fast friends. And everybody in this truck, actually, this is the way you get around in Providencia, by the way. They call these taxis, but it's just a pickup truck. You call up some guy and he comes and picks you up in the truck. And if you have to get fuel or groceries or go someplace, you get a taxi, which is a pickup. Just a beautiful island. It's really off the beaten track quite a bit. So there weren't any real signs, for most businesses. Everybody just knew where the store was that sold, something you needed. So you just ask around. You'd go and do all sorts of things. This gentleman was a musician, and he stuck his head out the window and said, "Would you like to buy my CD?" So we bought his CD, and it was great. And we still have it. It's really, really nice Caribbean music. The port captain, the gentleman in white there, was just an amazing guy. Invited us. He's in the Colombian Navy. These are all the cruisers from the anchorage, enjoying a party. Very wonderful welcome. There's Minky all decked out with all her cruising stuff. You can see we've got wind scoops up trying to get that hot tropical air through the boat. It's better than no air. And we're just enjoying the beautiful view there. And the boat being level and not bouncing around after 6 days at sea feels fantastic. We met all sorts of people there that became fast friends, and we would end up spending almost a year cruising with a lot of these folks. This is a boat called Lauren Grace, Ernie and Charlene on board, and we had lots of adventures with them. Everybody called Ernie the harbor master because he was the guy who knew what was going on, where you could get gas, where you could get batteries, what the security situation was, you name it. The harbor master there invited us to go on a mountain climbing expedition up into the jungle, but it was considered somewhat dangerous because I guess there were gorillas and things up in there, or some sort of thieves that they were worried about. So um, you can't see them here, but we had an armed military escort on this trip. They put us all into a truck, and it was tough going. It's only, you're not going up that high. I think it was like 1,300 feet or something, but it's right from sea level. And the temperature is about 90 and the humidity is not much less. It was tough climbing. The gentleman there in the foreground squatted down is actually one of the Colombian Navy guys who led us on the way. And it was great that they did because there were no trail signs or anything like that. And there was all sorts of poison plants and animals you wanted to watch out for. But the view was unbelievable once you got to the top, just looking down on the Caribbean as far as you can see. And this photo, again, is kind of a little blurry, but it's because probably I was sweating like crazy and it was super humid. You started to feel that super Caribbean humidity, which we would feel more of. People are super friendly on Providencia. This is just a typical, family group using their moped to go to the store, and you see that everywhere. That was the guy on the left there was kind of my favorite taxi driver. He was a really nice guy, and it took me all over the island, did all kinds of stuff with us. And one day he was driving along. He said, "You want to meet my family?" And we said, "Sure." So we stopped at his house and we met his family and chatted up for a while. I'm not certain where his wife is here, but she was there too. And you can see the Colombians are really into art. Everywhere you go, there's something like this wild sculpture here of a iguana in the middle of the road. It's just really neat. And we went to a horse race on the beach where they served up fresh fish caught just right off the shore there, and watched these people ride bareback horses. I mean, it's hard to get the sense there how fast they were going, but they were just thundering up the beach right in front of us. It's kind of unusual to watch a horse race where you're standing so close you could reach out and touch them if you wanted to. This was a guy we nicknamed the Mango Man. He doesn't have a mango here, he's got a coconut, but Keith would come out and he always had fresh fruits and veggies, and who knew what he would have that day. So we said, "Yeah, come on by anytime you got something interesting." So here he is getting a drinking coconut ready for us. Minky there in the middle, and some of the other boats in that fabulous anchorage, just beautiful spot. We met this Dutch couple, gentleman there at the red shirt on, and was bringing over some bananas to us one day. They made the mistake of believing the charts offshore and decided to see if they could anchor in the lee of a charted reef. Luckily, they had an aluminum boat because, like many charted reefs in that part of the Caribbean, the chart would have notations on it like, "This reef may be 5 miles northeast of its charted position." And so I didn't get within 5 miles of that reef. And I remember reading that notation as we went by. It turned out they went up on the reef and had a nasty time getting off, but luckily they had an aluminum boat. So eventually we headed down to Panama, and now we could sort of breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief. We're below 10 degrees, out of the hurricane belt, and now we could relax a little bit, didn't have to push on quite as much, which was great because there's a lot to see and do. This is Bocas del Toro, which is kind of a famous or infamous backpacker place that a lot of people love to visit. Frankly, I wasn't super enamored of it. When we were there, it rained just about every day and was super muddy. We had an interesting incident in the harbor where my son and I were standing in the cockpit when debating about putting out a second anchor because we were in the middle of a thunderstorm when a bolt of lightning hit right next to us. I don't know how close it was, but it sounded like hot dogs being put on a grill, a sort of a sizzling sound. And our electronics, which were off, all turned on the boat, and with a tremendous bang. And nothing was busted, amazingly, but it was a close hit. Walking around there, we were carrying the umbrellas to protect us from the sun. We're just starting to get used to this tropical heat. And the water was always a refuge. You could always jump in the water and enjoy a nice cool swim. This fisherman, local fisherman, came by and took Heather out for a ride in his canoe. And this is just a typical canoe you see down there. It's actually a dugout. And this guy's a fisherman. You can see he's got some line up there. And this is a normal boat. I mean, these guys go out into deep ocean water, like offshore, you'll see them. You can see his flippers there. He dives for fish and lobsters and stuff. No safety gear whatsoever. It's unheard of. And eventually we moved over to the east, moving east towards Colombia. We went to Cologne, where there's a giant, modern, fancy marina near the entrance to the Panama Canal, where people pull in and do all their paperwork and whatnot to get the clearance for the Panama Canal, which is quite expensive and difficult, and also to arrange for extra line handlers and all that kind of stuff. We again had a great time, though. We met this man here, Reet, was a deckhand on a local sport fishing boat. And so we always had our fill of fresh fish because those guys always catch more than they can eat. And he helped me by being my sort of bodyguard. I went into Cologne, which is one of the most dangerous cities in the Western world, to do our paperwork. And you have to go right into the middle of the city. And it basically is, he was walked behind me so that somebody wouldn't come up and smash me over the head, and helped to translate a little bit, though I thought he was going to help me with the paperwork, but it turned out he can't read or write. So I ended up with a few problems there, but got it done. And the marina was on the site of the old naval base that was there until we abandoned Panama. And it's just all these roads and structures and things that have now been taken over by the jungle. You can see that Leslie's carrying a boat hook, and that was because there was serious wild animals and serious jungle here. But it turned out that the worst danger was feral dogs, that when the military left, they had to leave all their dogs behind. And so now there's dog packs in the jungle, and you don't dare walk around without some sort of weapon. In fact, one day Leslie and I were walking on a trail, and we turned around, and as we started to go back, I looked down and I could see that we had been tracked by dogs. And just as we were noticing that, one of them leaped out of the undergrowth, snarling at us. But luckily, Leslie is like almost like a dog, animal whisperer. She gave that dog the evil eye and told him he was bad, and he slunk back into the jungle and didn't attack us. But we did have our sticks after that. And the trees were just full of monkeys and wild birds, and the rivers were full of crocodiles. But of course, we had to repair our boat again, which a lot of people say the definition of cruising is repairing your boat in exotic harbors around the world, and it's always true. Um, our exhaust system began to leak and spray salt water all over the inside of the boat on our way between Bocas del Toro and Cologne. So we hired this guy who turned out to be a local fixer. He was actually an American who had moved down there and knew the ins and outs because you couldn't really like go into a marine shop and just buy something. This guy made everything. Like he made me a fiberglass water lift muffler here, and he made these elbows and parts and put it all together for a reasonable price too. We really enjoyed just seeing all of the odd, cultural things. Moving further east towards the Sandbla Islands, the Gunayala area, which in our day, by the way, was called Cunayala. I'll talk about more about that in a minute. We went to a place called Portobello, which has this old fort up here on the hill. And this was actually a pretty important harbor back in the days when the Spanish gold fleets roamed the Caribbean. And in fact, Sir Francis Drake is buried out here at sea. He died here in Portobello of dysentery, I think, and was buried in full armor in a lead-lined coffin somewhere near here. They've never actually found his remains, but Sir Francis Drake, the famous English Englishman who helped defeat the Spanish Armada, for example, he was in this part of the world trying to basically rob the Spanish of their gold that they had robbed the local inhabitants of. Interestingly, forts like this are just everywhere down there because the Spanish were down here from the 1500s on. But they're sort of so common that there's like no trail really or anything. We kind of wandered up to this thing through the jungle and figured out how to get there by just looking and going. There really wasn't any tourism about it at all. It was just completely overgrown, sitting on the top of the hill. We moved on to Linton, which is near Portobello. Portobello, by the way, is supposedly one of the wettest places in the Western Hemisphere, and Linton proved that to me. It started to rain one day, and I'm not talking about just like a shower. I'm talking about like coming down so hard that the deck couldn't drain. So there was like 2 inches of water on our deck. And the dinghy, which was an inflatable, had to be bailed every hour. And it rained like that for 24 hours straight. It was literally just like water pouring off the boat, like we were under multiple fire hoses or something for hour after hour after hour after hour. And one of the beauties, though, was we were able to fill our water tanks. I had rigged up our deck so that once it got cleaned, I could open a couple of valves and just run water off the deck right into our tanks, which is great because that's the best water is fresh water from the rain, from the sky. We moved on a little bit further, and there's a place that we call Monkey Island. It was amazing. It's like some sort of it's a research station that is just for researching monkeys, but it's just crawling with monkeys. They're very aggressive, though. You almost can't go ashore because they'll come after you and steal all your stuff, take your camera gear, and uh, might even bite you or something. So we basically just paddled in as close as we dared. Um, this was on the dock, but we kept the boats close by. We had a couple of inflatable kayaks, which I still have, by the way, pretty amazing. These Innova inflatable kayaks have lasted 15 years and I still use them. They have a few leaks in them now, but they're still working after all this time, but they were great for the kids. So each kid had his own, his or her own boat that they could take off in and go paddling. And they're pretty safe too because they don't sink. These monkeys were like just unbelievable. I don't have a good shot here of one standing up, but they could walk perfectly on their two hind legs, and they would come charging up to you, standing on their hind legs, full size, kind of intimidating. So we moved on, and finally, this is Porvenir, the first port in the what we were calling the Cunayala, but since about 2011, I believe they call it the Gunayala now, though it goes by a lot of different names. And you'll see San Blas Islands, which is the old Spanish name on the charts. It's a group of native people who are able to be somewhat self-governing. It's part of Panama officially, but basically the Panamanians are kind of hands off and they run things in their own way. And it's very different. It's both. It's an odd uh, contrast between the primitive things like these wooden dugout canoes they use, and make these beautiful molas that they sell to you. Here's a typical harbor arrival. A Kuna group arrives in their dugout, ties up, and asks if you would like to buy molas, because molas are these beautiful um, embroidered things that we'll show you in a minute, which represent stories and have symbolism that mean a lot to the Guna, but they also sell them and get good money for them and use that money for buying things that they need, like medicine or manufactured goods. This is just a typical family group paddling along, and actually a pretty good size dugout. And we would see these people, miles from any land, no safety gear whatsoever. And more than once, we helped a struggling group, and we met some nice people that way because, the storms would blow up and they had no motor. They would just be paddling for their lives, basically. And I've helped tow some people a couple of times. We kept enjoying these beautiful anchorages amongst these islands in the Guna Yala area, the San Blas. Many of them, most of them are, there's hundreds of islands, by the way, over a course of like 220 miles, and most of them are not inhabited. But it's all owned by the Guniala people. The coconuts are their property. You're not allowed to take them. You can buy coconuts from the Guna, but you're not supposed to take them. But there are certain places where cruisers tended to gravitate because they were, I hate to say it, they were further away from the Guna, because after a while it does get a bit tiring having dugout canoes lashed along both sides of your boat trying to get you to buy molas, which is fun for the first few days, but it gets, as I said, after it happens every single day, you do get a little tired. So you searched out some beautiful areas. And this is a place called the Coco Banderos, where there weren't any people around. There's our boat out there anchored, and it's hard to tell here, but there was only a circle in here of maybe 100 yards, probably 300 feet, that between a hole in amongst coral reefs where we could anchor. And we were kind of right in the center of it there. But the problem was it was like 35 feet deep, and I only had 300-foot circle to anchor in. So the amount of scope, so if you're right in the middle, you only have 150 feet. So you can't put out that much. Like if you put out 5-to-1 scope, you're right on the reef. It's a little nerve wracking, but you would think everything would be, fine and hunky dory, because this is the Caribbean. The wind always blows from the east. It's usually calm. It's usually, well, it's usually not necessarily calm, but it tends to be a limited range of wind, 10 to 25 knots, and from the same direction. But we soon learned that in this area in the San Blas, there's something called a chakasana wind. And what it is if you're sitting on your boat and you're facing east, all of a sudden, if you feel a slight cool breeze, immediately rig for 50, 60 knots, which this is the first one that hit us. It was about, I think it was 55 knots, according to a boat that was near us. This guy here is up on the reef. He dragged, we did not. And we helped save another guy who, it was basically, you can see it was really dark here. Just before dark, it hit. And the wind came in so fast from the opposite direction that we were pointing that we actually sailed downwind until we hit the end of our anchor road, then snapped around pointed into the 55 knots of wind. So it went from like 10 from the east to 55 from the northwest in about 30 seconds, I would say. Um, but another guy just circled us while this wind blew through. And he said, thank God for Minky, because he could see our anchor light and he knew that he only had this 300-foot circle that he couldn't leave because it was reef all around. And he kept circling us throughout the storm. It's kind of terrifying because here he was just circling around and around us in 55 knots of wind. These guys are kind of typical fishermen again. I happened to help these two guys out. They showed up one day and they were completely soaked, freezing to death. They'd been in the water for a long time, lost all their gear because they had capsized in the high wind. And so I gave them some food and some matches, and they were able to camp out, I think, on this island right over here and build a fire and warm themselves up. And I didn't think anything much of it. But a couple days later, they showed up and they said, here, this is for you. And they gave us this sort of prehistoric looking lobster, which was kind of scary, but we cooked it up and ate it and thanked them very profusely for that. People are always curious about anchor gear. We had this strange anchor called a bull wagga, which I still own, but I don't use it anymore. But it was a 45 pounder on a 38-foot boat. And that was on all chain. We had 300 feet of chain with 200 feet of nylon on it. And believe it or not, once in a while, we actually were out on the nylon, more than 300 feet of chain out. And this case, we had a second anchor out, a Fortress on all nylon, mostly with about a 10 or 15-foot chain rode. And the reason was because we wanted to limit our swing in one of these deep anchorages that we were always anchoring. And you're often anchoring in 30 to 50 feet of water. So anchor gear gets a real workout, and so does your back. Along the way, we found there were these backpacker boats, we'd call them. This guy brought tourists, backpacker people from Colombia to San Blas in Panama, or from Panama back to Colombia. The reason being, there's a no highway between Panama and Colombia. It's basically the only way across the Darien Gap there is by water. So there's this guy's a big one, kind of famous. I think this was the Stall Rata, it was called, which is, I'm not certain what that means, but some of the backpack boats were just these little 24 and 25 footers. And they were varied from reasonably seaworthy and funky to completely unseaworthy and horribly dangerous. But backpackers didn't know any better, so they would pay tons of money to be taken on a 24-foot boat across open ocean waters full of coral reefs. This group here on the island, we got to know quite well, because I think this is the crew that I helped one day in a storm. They were madly paddling and not going anywhere because the wind was just pushing them back. And I towed them over to their island in a dinghy. So we visited them on the island and became quite friendly with them. This is one of their typical huts on the island. And it's a strange arrangement. They decide amongst themselves who's going to go out and watch the island and harvest the coconuts for a while. So this family, later on, we'll see them again. We ran into them in another town because they had moved on from being out here, and some other family had moved in for a while. It's actually a matrilineal culture, and the women do a lot of the governing. The men have certain functions and the women have other functions, but basically the hierarchy is that the women rule, and they're very small race of people. My wife is 5'2", and she tended to be taller than most of the adult women. My daughter is 10 there, and she was the same size as a lot of adult women. And we were buying some Guna outfits for the kids, and everyone was very friendly. They're really nice people. Um, it was great to have my children be able to meet people of such different culture. They sort of spoke a little bit of English, a little bit of Spanish, more Spanish, and of course the Guna, which we didn't know any of. So somehow or another, we managed to communicate most of the time, though. It wasn't always easy, but they understood that we were what we were trying to do, and everybody has certain needs. They're looking for food or water, that sort of thing, and so you can usually figure things out. And there's a couple of towns that are a little bit more developed. This is Nargana, which had actual, a cafe. You can see there a sign, but it wasn't really much. It was just a hole in the wall, nothing kind of place. But you could actually go here and buy some manufactured goods. I bought some gasoline for our dinghy outboard here and a few things like that. Though we found the more developed towns not to be as, they tended to be kind of dirty and pestilential, have to be honest with you. They were spraying the streets down here constantly with some sort of horrible insecticide, trying to keep down dengue fever, which was rampant at the time we were there. This is kind of a bad photo, but I wanted to show you. This is another anchorage we called Barbecue Island over here, where a lot of the cruisers gathered. But this kind of illustrates how quickly the wind shifts. You can see that this group of boats over here to port or to the left, for some reason, they're pointing one direction, and this group of boats to the right is pointing another direction. And that shows you how the wind shift is just roaring across the harbor here. And you've got to be prepared for that instant wind shift from pleasant, comfortable conditions to hanging on for dear life. And there's nobody to help you down there. You're on your own. The other cruisers help everybody, but there's no Coast Guard, there's no police, there's nobody you could reach on a radio outside of the other cruisers. So we all have to help each other out. Heather, I think, gave this child one of her stuffed animals, which was nice because there's one of the molas, by the way, just to give you an idea. And all this stuff means something, but what exactly, I don't know. It's just amazing symbology, but they're all unique and different, and they're just gorgeous. And we own a bunch of them. We did spend money on them, but we planned on that. We went down there with good amounts of cash because that's the only functional. You have to use American dollars there, even though it's Panama. That's what everybody uses. This is the family that Heather gave the stuffed animal to. So they invited us over one day, and we had fresh coconuts. The father back there in the back climbed a tree right next to us barefoot. It was pretty amazing to watch. Just went right up it like a monkey and grabbed a couple of fresh coconuts and brought them down and lopped the top off with his razor sharp machete. And we had sat around and chatted and looked at photos and things for a minute. He actually had some photos that people had taken of them, and we took some of them too as well. So we eventually we moved on from the San Blas to Cartagena, Colombia. Again, we had never planned to really visit Colombia, but after our good experience at Providencia and needing again some more supplies and repairs and this and that, basically every 3 months or so we've got to hit like a major place to stock up. So we heard good things about Cartagena, so we moved on. And in the background here, you can sort of see Club Nautica, which is the big yachting hangout there in Cartagena, and it was well worth it. We ended up spending a lot of time in Colombia. In the harbor, we were guarded by the Colombian Navy and Coast Guard, which was helpful because actually Colombia did have some security issues. There were pirates around and people trying to swim out to boats and that sort of thing. Somebody actually did swim out to our boat one time, so we anchored further out after that. He didn't get aboard. Our boat has pretty high sides. It was luckily Leslie was there and heard a rattling, called me on the. We had a cell phone at that point. We actually got a cell phone when we were in Colombia. But pretty soon, Leslie and everybody were enjoying the Club Nautico Yacht Club. We had endless parties there, dances. Colombians just love music, love dance. Leslie's a dancer too, so between the two of them, there was always something going on at the club, and it was a fun place to hang out. The Colombian dancers are just unbelievable. This is just in the marina, basically. One night, it's like somebody said, "Oh, there's a party. Let's go," and these things would happen all the time. This was just like a normal event going on in the Club Nautico. It was amazing. The kids from all over the world were incredible there. This was a major meeting point for a lot of different cruisers getting ready to go through the Panama Canal and going around the world or coming back from going around the world. And so there was this great international bunch. And in this picture here, I think there's English kids, American kids, Dutch, um, New Zealand. I think there might be a French child there in the background too, as well. But we called them the international team because they ended up in the afternoon after they do their schoolwork in the morning in the Club Nautico. They would go off and play soccer, and sometimes with the local kids too. So we had the international team against the Colombian team. Cartagena is an amazing city, just so much fun to visit. Tons of art. I'm sort of flipping through here fast because I'm looking at the time and knowing I got to keep moving ahead here. We visited the spectacular castle, which towers over the harbor. This was a fort built to guard that Spanish gold, and it actually got defeated a couple of times, and but often defeated the attacking British. My father there in the blue shirt came down and visited us for a while, and we had him stuff his suitcase full of all sorts of impossible to get low stuff that we needed for the boat, like a new hydraulic steering gear and a new camera and a new computer. All of our computers would die in the humidity and the bouncing on the boat. This is a gentleman who was a Navy commander who was famous for defeating the English many times, and unfortunately, he lost, I think, his right arm, his left eye, and his left leg. And eventually, he did die, but not of all of his war injuries. He died of some tropical disease, which was often the case. Botero is a famous artist from Colombia. Botero statues are just all over the place in Cartagena. Beautiful streets, interesting little shops, restaurants. Everything was very inexpensive for us. We could eat out there as a family, for almost the same price that we could eat on board. So we often would go to some little um, restaurant and just have a delicious home cooked meal for not very much. The record that we set was in Panama. We had a hot meal for four of us, including drinks, for $8. It wasn't usually that cheap, but that was pretty good. I was a fisherman there just in the harbor. Harbor was totally filthy. The water was unbelievable. I wouldn't be surprised if you should not touch it, but it, whoop, I'm sorry about that. Let's go back here, see if I can get this to go. There's all of these incredible warrens of shops, and this is the nice part of town, tourist part of town and things, but I would go to some places like this that were less desirable parts of town, but I didn't carry my camera because they were considered to be very dangerous, but I would be looking for things like alternator parts or engine parts or something like that. So I had to go to these other places. But this one, for example, here's a shop where they will make phone calls for you. You basically, and this was before everybody had a cell phone. And there were all these people though wandering around the streets with cell phones, and you could just stop them and say, "I need to call wherever." It could be the United States, and they would place the call for you, and you would pay them in cash after the call was over. our kids from the marina got together and went to a retirement community at Christmas time and played Christmas carols for everybody. My son had his violin on board and was part of the group. It was really fun. Nice to be able to give back like that. And the cruising community is very giving. We organized a blood drive, for somebody who needed blood in the hospital. Did a lot of different things. We at Christmas time, the barrios just decorate to the nines, just unbelievable lights and just really interesting. You can actually take tours. So we got a bus tour, and at one point they stopped in the middle of all this in this neighborhood, and we went out and walked around the streets, and all these kids were like super excited to see that I was taking photos, and I showed them the photos on my little digital camera. By the way, this was back in 2005, so the digital cameras were a little bit primitive back then, but I'm so happy that I had them along. I went through, I think, 3 cameras on the trip, though. They just didn't last in the heat and humidity. The Christmas lights are amazing. And there's the international soccer team ready to go. There was a fort just down the street from the marina where the kids would go down the street. This day, it doesn't look like the Colombians were there, but some days it was, of course, the Colombian kids are amazing at soccer. But our international team held its own. And that was their gym class, essentially. Work in the marina on your schoolwork, then go down the street and do the afternoon. And again, cruising is repairing your boat in exotic ports around the world. Cruisers were doing a lot of this. This is a CQR anchor bent somehow. It's hard to imagine. How did the ears get bent back like that? But anyway, it happened. And the marina was just full of people getting stuff repaired. Basically, the worst things were refrigeration, windlasses, and anchoring gear. Leslie and the kids went up to an alligator farm where they were raising alligators for something, I guess eating them. We got Minky hauled out at Club de Pesca, the fishing club. This is the Marine Railway. This little motor here gears it way down and pulls the boat right out of the water on this cool lift. And eventually she got hauled out. You can see the bottom really needs it after spending time in that harbor. We hired 2 guys. I think it was 20 bucks a day for these 2 guys. And they scraped the bottom and helped me put on tons of bottom paint and do some other work that I needed to do. This was some friends of ours on the Sea Loon here got fuel here at this dock one day. And because the dock was all busy, we couldn't go over there to get fuel. And the next day, we went to get fuel and we learned that they got robbed by pirates leaving the harbor that night. Armed pirates came aboard and robbed them. So if we had been one day earlier, we might have been in the boat to get robbed. So when we left the harbor, the Colombian Coast Guard actually came aboard and escorted us out of the harbor. And here I am working on the replacement of the hydraulic steering, which was, repairing boats in exotic harbors, but managed to do it. My father is the hero. He came down on an airplane with that thing in his suitcase and made it. Got a nice fresh coat of paint, makes everything look good. You had to haul your dinghy up every single night, and I chained it to the boat. Dinghies and outboards tended to disappear quickly if you didn't do that. So every cruiser hauls their boat out of the water every single night. Back to the Sandbla, heading north now again, really enjoying the Sandbla Islands. This was Barbecue Island where the cruisers often had giant bonfires of fallen palm fronds and just enjoyed our time together. Leslie was always an amazing cook, baking fresh bread down below. These friends of ours, I just threw in this shot because it just shows how iffy cruising can be sometimes. These guys were like the most organized, everything perfect boat, and their boat burnt to the waterline and sunk when they were in Bonaire later. We think it was a electrical short. They were diving on a reef and they came back and their boat was gone. Their dog had been swimming in the harbor and somebody rescued it. the Kuna Yala area is amazing, just so worth doing. Here we went to a town on the mainland, and I had to pay the chief, I think like 15 bucks or something. And he allowed us to fill up our water tanks with pipes that went way up into the jungle. But because the head of the water was so high up the mountain, the pressure was unbelievable. So I had to like figure out a way to go from a 6-inch pipe down to the garden hose that we needed for water and reduce the pressure. And we had this amazing Rube Goldbergian system, and everything was working great until some little jokester kid decided to open the valve all the way, and all the joints exploded. And we had a huge geyser spraying over the entire village with everybody running around like mad trying to put the pipe back together. This was a Kuna shop where the owner had this little pet deer, Dilly, little strange. Classic Panama anchorage. Not much shelter, but usually fine, unless you get one of those Chakasana winds. Again, Barbecue Island. This guy is the guy I call the pirate. He was an amazing character. This boat sunk in about 100 feet of water. It hit a reef. Why the guy, it was a single-hander coming in from Colombia, decided to try at night to come in. You can't do that in the San Blas. There's no reef, there's no buoys, everything's mischarted, there's no lights. He hit a reef, his boat sunk. He was lucky to get out alive. His inflatable life jacket popped, which you would think would be great, except it pinned him up under the bimini. And so the boat was going down with him being jammed into the bimini as the boat sunk. He managed to eventually claw his way out, make it up to the surface, and survived. But this guy doesn't look like it, but he free dove down 100 feet, got a line on this guy's boat and pulled it out of the water. I've got a lot of tales of his, but basically I helped him a couple of times. He had this giant old trawler that washed up onto a reef that he used for storing stuff on and illegally selling fuel. And I bought fuel from him because he used the old fishing tanks, like 5,000 gallons on the old trawler, to sell diesel fuel in a place where there was no diesel fuel for hundreds of miles. So he made money that way. And I helped him move 50 cases of alcohol. I'm not certain where it was going or what was going on with it, but we became sort of friends and had respect. And he helped me one time. I called him on the sat phone because I knew he was in Panama City. And I said, my daughter needs some medicine. Some doctors in the fleet helped diagnose the problem, but she needed prescription, which we couldn't. There was no drugstore in the San Blas at all. So I called up the pirate because he's a fixer type guy. And I said, this is what I need. He said, no problem. Next day, I have no idea how he got from Panama City back there. The next day he showed up. He had gone to a doctor, gotten the prescription, went to a pharmacy, got the exact thing we needed, came back. I had to pay some cash for it, but that was the kind of guy you need once in a while. Molas again, just unbelievable. I'm moving as fast as I can here. Let's just see. I got to keep firing ahead because we're running out of time. Great dancing. Leslie was always in on the dancing. The Gunas were always doing something fun. There was events and festivals and you name it. Kids were just always fun to be around. Heather loved the dogs and the pets that she ran into down there. Sometimes we'd have to go find a freshwater river on the mainland to do things like laundry and stuff because there just wasn't enough fresh water anywhere. You couldn't like buy it. Most places you couldn't get it. So this was a little iffy because there were crocodiles, but we figured with enough of a crowd, somebody would notice the crocodile before we would have a problem. The classic Gunayala boats, just dugouts, and most of them paddled. Some of them have outboards. And this is the family we met way back on that other island. everybody, we came ashore here on this different island, and Leslie and the kids were instantly recognized. And before you knew it, everybody was laughing and gathering and talking about old times. And this was a few months later down the road, because the Guna move around. They live in different places. And we went to a festival where they recreate this major event in their history, where the basically a bunch of people tried to wipe out the Guna back in the, I think, 1920s. And the interestingly, the U.S. Navy um, basically came in with a gunboat and said, "Cut it out." And so the U.S. Navy is well respected. The Gunayala ended up fighting back. They're very physically strong and tough people, and they paddled in their dugout canoes. I was just reading, and with their machetes and whatnot, ended up like killing something like 60 Panamanian soldiers and police or something before the battle was finally ended by the U.S. Navy gunboats. You see lots of strange boats when you're out cruising down there, all sorts of characters out on the water. We eventually started to head north. This is back at Providencia, again, one of our favorite places. And we moved on. That's leaving the dock at Providencia. And we've had a great offshore sail. These are some friends of ours who we sailed in company with around the corner there where Honduras and Nicaragua are, because they are, there were credible reports of piracy at this time. A boat had gone missing like a week before this, and with no trace. Some Canadians. I never found out exactly what happened to them, but so we decided to buddy boat. We traveled in a group of 3, and we went offshore as far as we could off the coast of Honduras and Nicaragua with no lights, staying close together. We eventually did get up to Honduras, but we never saw anybody. We stayed out of sight of the mainland, and I was glad I did. A few months later, some other cruisers who went anchored in on that coast there were, one of them was killed, actually. In Honduras, this is a group of Germans opened a German pub, strangely enough. Honduras is much more touristy. These are the offshore islands of Honduras, though, the Bay Islands, they call them, and they're fun. Again, I'm back to repairing stuff. This was kind of cool, though. I had an alternator problem, and I went into a fishing boat dock and explained the problem, and they put it onto a seaplane, flew it to the mainland. Somebody rebuilt my alternator. It was back the next day. It cost me $50. We had very little problem with customs and immigration and things like that. This island was reportedly had a terrible, port master, and so people were warned to stay away, et cetera. So Leslie and Heather went on ahead. By this point, Heather could speak really good Spanish. We hired a tutor for Ian and Heather when we were in Cartagena, and they were both speaking Spanish. And by the time I got to the port captain's office, Leslie was looking at the port captain's baby photos, and they were laughing up a storm in his office, and we didn't have any problems with the clearing in. And actually, the ace in the hole after Heather learned Spanish was to bring my little daughter along speaking Spanish. And they just love children down there. And you bring in a child who speaks Spanish, who's your translator, and they just laugh and have a great time, and everything gets stamped, and you're out the door. These are some combination of cruising friends and some local kids too, as well. I think they were doing some babysitting actually for some locals there on this island. We went up the Rio Dulce to visit some of the incredible Mayan ruins, etc. And we got to the marina, luckily, just before dark, because this river is full of pirates at night, and you really don't want to be out there. Really cozy, cruiser hangout. Some people spend the whole rainy season here. The marina is not connected by road to land. You have to only go by water, which helps with the safety, but they still have armed guards. But a few months after we left, their armed guard was shot and killed one night in the marina. the towns were bustling. You could buy things and get most normal stuff, but it took a lot of work because there was lots of different shops you had to go to. And basically, everything was good. We hired a van to take us up to see some of the pyramids and things, and we stopped at it. We spent a night in a luxury hotel with a swimming pool, but it was a little nerve-wracking because you had road checkpoints every once in a while with soldiers behind sandbags with machine guns would come out and check everybody on the bus. But it was worth it. Unbelievable. And the amazing thing is you can actually climb right up these things. Um, just gorgeous. This is Tikal, which many of you probably have heard of, and just so worth it to visit. Just amazing structures. Kind of daunting, not really the most safety conscious setups. When you get up to the top, one false step and you tumble hundreds of feet down to your death, but spectacular. This place, you can't see it off to the right here is a straight drop off again, hundreds of feet. So we went back down the river and we actually spent a night anchored in the river, which is not recommended, but we anchored right next to each other, like two or three boats. And I slept the whole night sort of slept the night in the cockpit with my machete and club handy, but nothing happened. It's gorgeous up there. We always are getting together with our cruising friends. We still actually connect with them online, which is really neat. And we went on to Belize, which was fun. Going north, one of the things we wanted to see was the Lighthouse Reef and the Blue Hole. This was at Lighthouse Reef. There was this little bar in the middle of nowhere, nobody there. So my kids played chess one day in the bar, and there was just nobody around. And now we're kind of rushing north. And this is the next year, June of 2007, I guess it would be, um, for to beat the hurricane season coming again. We want to get back into the United States, so we're moving north. And we had to really do a lot, all day piloting to get through the coral reefs. You can just see on the horizon here the coral coming up. And Leslie did an amazing job of standing on the bow and telling me, go this way, go that way. And or Heather up with mast. Heather would climb up the mast steps up to the spreaders and ride up there for hour after hour because you had to eyeball your way through to get to the blue hole. There was no way. This is kind of typical piloting. It was kind of hazy. It wasn't the clearest water. It was really tough. We eventually wove our way through all of this and made it to the blue hole where right about lunchtime. So we're able to just hang out in the blue hole, motoring around in a circle. And that's it's just this amazing hole in the middle of the reef that goes down like 400 feet, has giant sharks and things in there. And right in the middle of this shallow coral area, and there's this giant blue hole. Look it up sometime, blue hole in Belize. We kept heading north. We got up into Mexico eventually. And this part of the trip was kind of eerie. There were like huge stretches where we didn't see anybody, not a single boat, not a single other person. It was kind of strange. But eventually we got up here into this is near Tulum, and we had to go in through this horrible coral reef entrance and anchor in behind the reef off the beach here with no holding. I mean, the bottom was like anchoring on a runway. Kind of nerve-wracking because the wind was blowing at 25 knots over the reef, crashing ahead of us, and the beach right behind us. And I put out every anchor and every piece of chain I had in all different directions, but it was all just lying on the bottom. Wasn't actually bit into anything. But again, it was worth it to see the amazing. This is the Mayan seaport, many people call it. We got up to Mexico and this was a Cuban refugee, escape boat that ended up washing up, they made it over to Mexico, but got caught and probably sent back to Cuba. But they make these amazing craft out of almost nothing and try to get to the US. This case, they ended up in Mexico. Quickly, we had to head back to avoid the hurricane season. We headed offshore between Mexico and the Keys, and it was flat calm, which was good and bad. It was 350 miles, and we ended up motoring all the way. It was a long motor, but luckily we had a motor sailor that could carry enough fuel to do it, and it was flat calm. But hour after hour, day after day, motoring along, and then we finally, though, got to that's Loggerhead Key Lighthouse down in the Dry Tortugas. It was nice to be back in the States, but the worst weather of the entire trip was that last day getting to Key West. It was just continuous thunderstorms, like, 50, 60 knot winds, zero visibility. We nearly got run down by the Coast Guard that was barreling out in one of their cutters trying to go to somebody calling Mayday. Constant Mayday calls all around us. They were Florida boaters, out in little sport fishing boats and things in conditions that were just, it was like, 6-foot seas, zero visibility, 50 knots one moment, 30 knots the next moment, then back up to 60, then down again to 20, it was just horrible. But we got it, we made it. And this was anchored at Key West. And we headed back north up the ICW through North Carolina. We were in North Carolina by the 4th of July. And that is all. So if anyone has any questions, I know I've run over here, but I'd be happy to still answer. Sorry to take you so long, but it's hard to summarize, thousands of miles of cruising in 2 years in 45 minutes or an hour. So thanks for being patient. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to say something or put something in the chat.
Okay. Hi, I have a question. It's Ann Vos in Warren. How did the kids do entering back into school?
They did well. We sort of timed it so that when they came back in, Heather was just starting middle school and Ian was just starting high school. It took them, I think the hardest part was, it wasn't so much the schooling as the, just sort of getting the socialization. Like they went from being, tremendous freedom to all of a sudden you had to like be somewhere at a certain time. And, when a bell rings, you go somewhere and you can't go and get food when you're hungry, and all those kind of things were more difficult than the schoolwork. But they had done, we actually ended up abandoning the sort of official school program that we had paid for and everything else, because there was just so much good stuff going on. And but the keys to their, I think, eventual academic success was that they both read just continuously. Our boat was stuffed full of books everywhere. And also Ian was able to help Heather with things like math and stuff like that. And they became very good companions in helping each other that way. And Ian ended up, going to RPI in, for computer science, and Heather ended up graduating. So they both graduated now. Ian's, then he went on to Microsoft, and so he's done fine. And Heather is a Vassar graduate, and she is pre-med. So, they did great. I think the hard part, like I said, was missing friends, socialization, being able to get away from your parents and go off and just do stuff with kids. But they did a lot of that still. They were very independent on the boat. They had their own boats. They'd often go off and do things on other boats or other islands without us.
That's fabulous. Great. We loved this.
Thanks. I should have said at the beginning too that someday we might do one on the Intracoastal Waterway. There's a lot more to tell about that, and it's a little bit less ambitious and but it has a lot to tell about. I think a lot of people don't realize what a wonderful cruising there is between, say, Maine and Florida.
Right, right. We've done it, what, 3 times, I guess? And we sailed down to Trinidad and back from the Vineyard
Oh, great.
in 93, but it was very different from what you've been describing, much less dangerous.
Well, where we were was you have to be self-sufficient, and you can't, it doesn't have the mod cons. There's no Coast Guard, there's no Marine Patrol, there's no radios, there's no phones ashore, there's no marine supply places,
Right.
buoys and lights and things are all gone. But it really breeds, the cruising group is very helpful. One of the
Mhm.
great things is there's a lot of doctors out cruising, so
Yeah,
usually you can find a doctor in the fleet somewhere.
yeah.
And we found we enjoy getting off the beaten track like that.
Mhm. Well, it's great. Question?
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Anyone else speak up if you'd like. Well, thanks, Gene. I see something in the chat here. I love talking about it. Just enjoy that experience so much. And even though it's 15 years ago, it seems like yesterday when I start talking about it.
Thank you so much. Just wonderful. It transported me
Oh, good.
out of my house.
Yeah, it's nice in the winter, sometimes to think about sweating and being hot and sticky. I kind of enjoy that too. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Part of our Sail MV Winter Lecture Series. This winter, we're unfortunately not in the Black Dog, but they had to close down. And we're going to have another one coming up in February, though what it is, I don't know yet, but it'll be great. So watch for our emails coming in, and we'll let you know soon what that February talk will be all about. And if nothing further, have a great evening. Thanks.